In the shrouded mist of an island, a group of American soldiers walk cautiously across the rugged rocky terrain. The relentless cold racks their bodies as much as the fear of the enemy that lurks from its hideout and is ready to strike at any moment. They can feel their presence in the air, but can't see them. Every shadow in the dense fog, every rustling of the wind seems to whisper of this unseen enemy. It's as if they're more ghosts than humans. This is a chilling portrayal of Operation Cottage, one of the most mysterious battles of World War II. The scene for the battle was set up far from the main stages of war operations, in the remote corner of the northern Pacific, the Aleutian archipelago. This seemingly inconspicuous chain of islands stretching from the Alaskan mainland to the western edge of the Bering Sea has been part of the United States since Alaska's acquisition in 1867 and was primarily known as a base for seal hunters. With its barren terrain, the archipelago had no resources to offer, but when the war broke out in the Pacific, it suddenly became a point of great interest for the Japanese. Despite its strategic position as a corridor between the eastern and western hemispheres, one must have wondered why the Japanese set sights on the Aleutians, as they were hardly ideal military bases. Their extreme weather conditions, challenging terrain, and remoteness posed logistical nightmares. The remotest of the islands, Attu for instance, was 700 miles from the nearest Japanese naval base and even farther from American facilities. However, the significance of the Aleutians lay in the broader strategy set by the Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Rather than aiming to expand Japan's defensive perimeter, the invasion of the Aleutians was intended as a diversion during the Midway campaign. By attacking the islands in proximity to the American mainland, Yamamoto hoped to draw the U.S. fleet away from Midway. Therefore, on June 3, 1942, a small Japanese fleet, led by 2 aircraft carriers, launched an attack on the Aleutians, initially aiming for the Adak Island. However, the luring maneuver was unsuccessful, as U.S. intelligence, having broken Japanese codes, sensed the true target and concentrated their efforts on Midway, resulting in a significant defeat for the Japanese main fleet. Despite failing to achieve his initial goal, Yamamoto ordered the Aleutian operation to continue, although with revised objectives. Thwarted by American resistance, instead of occupying Adak, the Japanese landed on the lesser defended islands of Attu and Kiska. With practically no resistance, the Japanese seized the 2 remotest islands of the archipelago. Initially seen as a temporary measure, the Japanese occupation became more entrenched over time. Attu and Kiska were quickly fortified with substantial garrisons, with Attu hosting 2,500 troops and Kiska 6,000 by the spring of 1943. The Japanese occupation of these islands, while strategically questionable, struck a deep chord with the American public and military leadership. For the first time since the War of 1812, foreign troops had set foot on American soil. It was a disturbing fact that transformed these remote outposts into symbols of national pride and honor. The United States Department of Defense Joint Chiefs of Staff, recognizing the symbolic importance of the Aleutians, immediately started devising plans to recapture the islands. Fear of a Japanese expansion into the Alaskan mainland led to an unprecedented airlift of troops and equipment to Alaska. Meanwhile, even though the Aleutians had lost their strategic value without control of Midway, the Japanese decided to entrench, constructing airfields on both islands and extensive defensive infrastructure. Initially well-supplied, Japanese soldiers endured the Aleutians' harsh climate of relentless winds, cold rain, and extended periods of darkness. However, this changed when the United States Navy imposed a stringent blockade of the occupied islands. A Japanese fleet's attempt to break this blockade in March 1943 resulted in the defeat of the Battle of Komandorsky Islands, leaving the garrisons on Attu and Kiska isolated. The isolation of the Japanese forces in Attu and Kiska was followed by airstrikes from the U.S. Army Air Force and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Although hampered by the treacherous weather, these early raids marked the beginning of sustained American efforts to dislodge the Japanese. The Alaska Defense Command, under Major General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., saw a rapid buildup boasting over 94,000 personnel, a figure that underscored the importance the United States placed on reclaiming the Aleutians. The stage was thus set for an American offensive to reclaim Attu and Kiska. With airfields established close to the occupied islands, American bombers intensified their strikes against the Japanese garrisons. The invasion plan, approved by the Joint Chiefs, first targeted the lightly defended Attu, cutting off Japanese communications and supply lines to Kiska. The upcoming campaign was to be a challenging endeavor due to the formidable Japanese defenses on the island and the severe Aleutian weather and terrain. However, the reconquest of Attu and Kiska was more than a military operation. It was a mission to erase a national disgrace and restore American sovereignty. On May 11, 1943, Operation Landcrab commenced to recapture Attu Island. The U.S. Army's 7th Division, under the command of Major General Albert E. Brown and later Major General Eugene M. Landrum, faced a daunting task: overcoming the unforgiving battle terrain and a dogged enemy. To the invading American force, Japanese defenders, led by Colonel Yasuo Yamasaki, demonstrated the Bushido Code, fighting with a level of determination and ferocity that profoundly impacted American troops. This code of honor, deeply ingrained in Japanese military culture, forbade surrender and encouraged fighting to the last man. Though outnumbered and outgunned, Yamasaki's troops utilized the island's natural defenses, caves, crevices, and ridgelines, turning the invasion into a grueling battle of attrition. The battle's climax occurred on May 29th when Yamasaki and his men made a desperate banzai charge, a last-ditch effort to break through American lines. Though ultimately futile, this audacious move highlighted the extreme lengths the Japanese were willing to go to avoid surrender. The aftermath of the invasion was grim. Of the 2,650 Japanese soldiers on Attu, only 29 survived, while American forces suffered 3,829 casualties, including 549 killed in action. The Battle of Attu was a sobering experience for the American military. The high casualty rate and the ferocity of the Japanese defense served as a warning of the challenges ahead in the Pacific War. The shadow of the Battle of Attu loomed large as American and Canadian forces prepared for Operation Cottage, the assault on Kiska Island. The 34,426-strong force, comprising the American 7th Infantry Regiment and the Canadian 13th Royal Infantry Brigade, approached Kiska with trepidation, knowing the Japanese garrison was more than twice the size of Attu's. Expectations were grim. It was estimated that 30% of the Allied forces might be lost in the upcoming battle. On August 15, 1943, the operation began with American forces landing on Kiska's western coast, with Canadian troops planned to land on the northwestern part a day later. An impressive fleet of 100 ships provided covering fire, raining down 330 tons of shells, complemented by 424 tons of bombs dropped by the 11th Air Force since mid-July. Things went wrong as soon as the landing boats approached the island coast. Due to inaccurate tidal forecasts, several tank landing ships ran aground on submerged volcanic rocks, causing a significant delay and congestion in the landing operation. With shouts and curses, soldiers somehow reached the black muck of the beach. It was sheer luck that in such circumstances, they met absolutely no resistance at the beach. The Japanese were nowhere to be found. However, the unopposed landing, rather than providing relief, heightened the soldiers' anxiety. Men of the 7th Infantry, having endured the brutality of the battle on Attu, could not shake off the feeling that the Japanese forces were merely biding their time, hidden in the island's higher elevations. The dense fog and relentless rain only heightened their fears. The first night on Kiska offered no respite. Soldiers, unable to erect shelters, dug into the rocky and tundra landscape to create makeshift foxholes. The dense fog reduced visibility to near zero, amplifying the sense of disorientation and fear. Throughout the night, sporadic gunfire rang out, tracer bullets cut through the fog, and the constant artillery fire from supporting warships added to the chaos. Voices of command were lost in the wind, leaving troops in heightened alertness, expecting an imminent Japanese counterattack that never came. As daylight broke, the weather showed no sign of improvement. Nevertheless, the order was given to advance into the island's interior. The troops, navigating through fog and rain, cautiously made their way toward what they believed were Japanese positions. In the freezing cold, the scared American soldiers perceived the enemy everywhere, firing at the slightest sound. In the fog-covered island, the invisible enemy started shooting back at one point. Reports of firefights and casualties and rumors of Japanese snipers fueled the tension. However, as the infantry advanced and reached their supposed enemy lines, they encountered an unexpected sight. Abandoned bunkers with food still on tables and destroyed weapons, but not a single Japanese soldier was found. That same day, August 16th, Canadian soldiers from the 13th Royal Infantry Brigade joined the fray, disembarking to the north of the American landing zone. They were immediately met with the same grim Aleutian weather, adding to their sense of premonition. As they moved inland, the fear intensified, leading to a trigger-happy atmosphere among men. And then, on the first day, they stumbled upon the enemy in the fog. Without hesitation, the Canadians opened fire. A fierce shootout started with soldiers on both sides shooting at random. With dense fog covering the battlefield, hardly any of them could see the opponent on the other side. Nevertheless, the exchange of fire lasted throughout the remainder of the day. Only in the morning did soldiers get up from their foxholes to count up the dead. The Canadians had 4 dead men, but managed to kill 28 enemy soldiers. However, as the fog began to lift, a horrifying and tragic truth was revealed. The soldiers they had killed in battle were not Japanese as they had assumed, but their fellow Americans. There were no Japanese forces present at all. In a brutal twist of fate, the Canadians and Americans had been unknowingly fighting against each other. From that point on, the truth slowly dawned on the Allied forces. Kiska, which they had anticipated to be a stronghold of 6,000 Japanese soldiers, was empty. The Japanese had evacuated the island long before the invasion, but even fighting the ghost of an enemy was still taking a toll on the Allies. In days to follow, more soldiers were killed by friendly fire, but most of them fell victim to Japanese booby traps and mines. In one single incident, 71 sailors were killed and 47 wounded when a destroyer struck an off-harbor mine. By August 24, when Kiska was finally declared secure, Allied casualty toll had reached 300 men. The mystery of the missing Japanese garrison was unraveled only after the war. It turned out that the Japanese had evacuated Kiska on July 28th in a daring and meticulously planned operation. Under the cover of dense fog, the evacuation was carried out using cruisers, destroyers, and transport ships. Instead of the usual cargo, this rescue fleet carried 20 landing crafts. These vessels and 19 boats from Kiska transferred the entire garrison to safety. The whole operation was completed in less than an hour. Japanese soldiers boarded the ships, leaving everything behind them. This feat was achieved right under the noses of the U.S. forces, who, despite regular aerial patrols, had failed to notice the evacuation. Interestingly, after July 28th, Allied intelligence did note a marked decrease in activity on the island. During this period, radio signals from Kiska ceased entirely. Additionally, American reconnaissance aircraft flying over the area reported a complete absence of anti-aircraft fire, an unusual observation considering the expected presence of Japanese forces. Nevertheless, the commander of North Pacific Force, Rear Admiral Thomas C. Kincaid, dismissed these signs as Japanese deceptive maneuvers, believing the enemy was hiding in the mountains. The Americans and Canadians have thrown enormous amounts of weapons, ammunition, manpower, and equipment into a battle against the enemy that was long gone. After the conclusion of Operation Cottage, the Canadian 13th Royal Infantry remained stationed on Kiska for an additional 3 months. Their days were spent living in tents amidst the island's harsh and isolated environment. They finally departed the island on January 12, 1944, with a profound sense of relief. For the remainder of World War II, the island of Kiska lay undisturbed, returning to its status as a small, remote dot in the vast Pacific Ocean. A silent witness to the battle in which men confronted not an actual enemy, but the overwhelming shadow of fear. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Hit the bell icon to be notified of our next video.